Anytime there's a police shooting, especially a police shooting of the right color arrangement, you're going to get two pieces of information presented before anything else. Number one, the race of the person shot. And number two, the outrage of the protesters. In this case of Patrick Lyoya in Grand Rapids, Michigan, is no different.
Protests in Michigan overnight after Grand Rapids police released videos of the fatal police shooting of a black man during a traffic stop.
The officer is white, Lyoya is black.
Some of the community that we spoke to last night said police need not only more de-escalation training, but also more mental health and diversity training.
Those are the two most important pieces of information for the Chiron: the color of the quote-unquote victim and the outrage of the protester response. The NPC input is as simple as the output. This is racism, racism bad, you should be mad. Now, in fairness, the NPC output was at least a little more mild this time. Instead of burning the entire place down or shooting fireworks at it, Minneapolis or Portland style, the mob in Grand Rapids threw eggs at officers at the police precinct. And of course, that's nothing near the worst of the mob behavior that we've seen over the last few years. It's not to say that you don't have the right to go out and scream on the street. It's just that if you do, a good reason for it does help your case. And the reason often presented in defense of these protests is that the protesters are quote-unquote demanding answers.
A frustrated community demanding answers.
Which is fine, assuming answers are being denied, but they aren't. If you didn't know, you might think that authorities are withholding information from the public. They are not. In fact, the opposite. Full video of the incident in question was released before those angry eggs were ever even tossed, and these news segments were edited and broadcast. A proper order of priorities would be a presentation of those comprehensive facts first to evaluate if the outrage is justified, but instead, coverage often starts with the premise that the outrage is justified, and the facts are then selected and molded to suit that pre-conclusion. So let's actually start from the start instead of from that pre-conclusion. Let's start with, who is Patrick Lyoya, the man shot by a police officer in Grand Rapids? Lyoya was a 26-year-old refugee from the Congo who came to the U.S. in 2014 with his family. He had two sons, and he worked at an auto parts factory. And he also had a somewhat significant criminal record. And no, that's not to say that a prior criminal record automatically means that the shooting was justified, but it does offer additional context for the sort of activities that Lyoya involved himself in. And it is information that the officer may have had at the time of the confrontation. Lyoya had several traffic incidents, including a DUI charge that was dismissed, but he also had a conviction for violent crime. This coverage softens it somewhat as domestic violence, but specifically, it was the George Floyd special. It was assault on a pregnant woman. Lyoya was convicted in 2017 on that charge, sentenced to probation, which he violated and then did not pay his fine, resulting in the state garnishing his wages. And there's one other small but important detail on that rap sheet: a prior arrest for motor vehicle theft as well. Now, in fairness, that charge was dismissed. I haven't been able to find the specific reason why, whether the charge was factually bogus or if there was some procedural issue, or maybe it was just the prosecutor's choice. But it does raise the possibility of prior criminal involvement that could be more directly related to this recent encounter. Which brings us to the event in question. On April 4th, Lyoya was stopped by a yet-to-be-identified Grand Rapids police officer, and the specific reason for that traffic stop remains under investigation. It has yet to be disclosed, according to the Grand Rapids police chief, as of Wednesday.
Why he make a stop? I don't know the answer to that question at this time.
In the body cam footage released, though, the officer gets right to a point at issue. The license plate is not registered to that car. At least the officer gets right to that point after directing Lyoya to remain inside the car, which Lyoya refuses.
Hey, stay in the car! Stay in the car!
Dude, I'm stopping you. Do you have a license? Do you have a license?
For what?
I'm stopping you. Do you have a license?
What do you want?
The plate doesn't belong on this car.
Instead of grabbing his driver's license as he said he would, Lyoya then closes the car door and starts walking away, and a physical struggle ensues.
Stop.
Lyoya then runs, and due to his pants around his thighs and his efforts to hold them up, he's not very fast, and the officer catches and tackles him. And the officer gains control of Lyoya and tries to bring him over to the police car, but Lyoya keeps fighting. After a fight that has now lasted about 90 seconds, the officer then draws his taser, and as he's trying to use it, Lyoya grabs the taser and fights for it. This fight brings the two to the ground. At this point, the officer's body cam turns off. Police say that's because some pressure on it hit the off button for 3 seconds, but Lyoya's passenger recording on his cell phone captures the rest of the encounter. An underrated piece of this footage is the commentary from Lyoya's friend as he records. No, you're misunderstanding. He's not resisting at all.
Stop resisting!
No, he good. He not resisting nothing, bro.
Taser? What taser? I have no idea what you're talking about.
Let go of the taser!
No, he ain't got no taser. I see that.
Well, hey, have you tried just talking with him? Because he's a very good listener.
Like, he good, bro. Like, can you talk to him like good? Like, can you, yeah. No, like he good. Like, you can talk to him, bro.
But the trouble is, the officer has tried just talking for several minutes now to decreasing effect, not better. And no matter what the play-by-play commentary says, from this guy's cell phone angle, you can clearly see Lyoya's hand strongly gripping the taser and fighting the officer for it. The struggle for the taser lasted something close to another 90 seconds after the officer drew it. Throughout the struggle, the officer had his right hand on the taser. At some point in the struggle, his right hand loses grip on it. The officer issues repeated commands to let go of the taser, but Lyoya does not.
Let go of the taser! Let go of the taser!
And when the officer loses control of the taser, he takes his right hand, grabs his pistol, and shoots Lyoya in the back of the head. And I don't use still frames to try to hide or misrepresent anything. It's just that there are certain things that Queen Susan Wiki doesn't like us peasants showing on YouTube. The full footage is linked in the description, and you can evaluate that sequence of events for yourself. That officer has been placed on leave during the investigation. The police department isn't naming him because he's not yet facing any charges, though the investigation could change that. The decision on whether to bring charges will be up to the county prosecutor's office. And of course, your usual cavalcade of Ben Crump and company has swooped in to call everybody racist for personal enrichment. Crump says it was the officer who escalated.
You see a police officer escalate a minor traffic stop into a deadly execution.
Well, one, we don't actually know that this was just a minor traffic stop. We know that Lyoya had a prior run-in related to car theft. So it's possible that he simply rolled a stop sign, yes. It's also possible that the car he was driving was stolen. And that's why the license plates were switched. And that's why Lyoya was so uncooperative, because he knew that he had significant things to hide. If that's the case, the crime is much more serious than just a minor traffic stop. But two, even if it did start as a minor issue, the lethal shot was not a response to a traffic citation. The lethal shot was a response to Lyoya fighting for control of the officer's weapon. That will be the key to the investigation and the judgment of justification here. Did the officer face an imminent threat of serious bodily harm?
The test is going to be whether in the view of a reasonable police officer, whether that deadly force was needed to prevent death or great bodily harm to that officer.
Whether you consider a taser deadly or not, it is certainly capable of great bodily harm.
So a taser is not per se a deadly weapon. The taser is what would be known as an intermediate weapon. Intermediate weapon would have the potential to cause death. It would have the potential to cause great bodily harm, but not necessarily, and that's depending on all the facts of the case.
And even if the taser merely injures or incapacitates, if the officer is incapacitated even momentarily, he has a deadly weapon on his hip, and if this criminal has shown he's willing to take the taser, it's reasonable to think he might take the gun too. My goal here is not necessarily to sell you on a slam dunk exoneration for the officer, though anytime you fight an officer for his weapons, I tend to think you've created a self-defense situation for that cop. But my goal is to show that the facts are detailed in ways that cast plenty of doubt on Lyoya, and those details are often unemphasized or outright excluded in the news presentation. Take CNN's coverage, for example. Outside of emphasizing Lyoya's race and protester outrage first, as discussed, they repeat the propaganda talking point that this was all just over a traffic stop, just an improper registration issue.
The NAACP adding, an unregistered license plate should not be a death sentence.
But we don't actually know why Lyoya was stopped. The investigation has not uncovered that information yet, and we have circumstantial reason to believe that Lyoya may have been involved with stolen cars in the past. And again, that is not to say with certainty that he stole this car, but it is highly plausible. Uncertain, yes. But the same degree of uncertainty applies just as validly to saying it was all just a traffic stop gone wrong. The CNN piece makes no mention of Lyoya fighting for control of the taser for minutes, just that the taser failed to make impact on deployment.
Then the officer uses a taser, but it fails to make impact.
No commentary about Lyoya's hand grasping the taser. No commentary about Lyoya fighting for control of that taser for 90 seconds before the shot was fired. CNN emphasizes that a language barrier likely played a big role in the case.
Lyoya was a Congolese refugee, the chief saying a potential language barrier is part of the investigation.
Yeah, because stop is Swahili for run and fight, and here, have a taser. It's my gift to you. There was no language confusion. Violence is a universal language. And regardless, they conceal the fact that the officer tried to clarify that issue. Immediately on confrontation, the officer asked, "Hey, do you speak English?" And Lyoya confirmed, "Why, yes, I sure do."
Do you have a driver's license? Do you speak English?
Yes.
And so did his friend, offering the commentary, by the way. If this was a language problem, I don't know why translation services weren't offered by the guy urging the cop in English to try conversation instead. But most importantly, this piece gets dismissive with the central question. Well, even if Lyoya did get control of the taser, who cares? Is that really that big of a danger?
Authorities now facing tough questions, like whether the officer's life was in enough jeopardy to draw his gun.
But the question isn't just what damage can a taser do to you. It's what damage can be done to you by a guy who's already shown an effort to steal your weapons if you're incapacitated. Now, of course, the investigation is ongoing. It is possible that my suspicion that Lyoya stole this car is totally wrong. It is possible that there are additional facts yet to be revealed to the public that will change our understanding of this case, and therefore it is also possible that the officer is in the wrong. The only thing that's not possible, though, is the one thing that's presented as a given, that Lyoya did nothing wrong and has absolutely no responsibility for this outcome, that somehow being a violent criminal who responds to a police encounter by trying to take the officer's weapon is a totally understandable situation that any of us could experience any day of our lives. If it's so shocking that a traffic stop could end in death, well, that's because it wasn't just a traffic stop when it ended in death. It was a self-defense scenario for the officer created by a guy who refused the politeness initially offered to him and chose violence instead. And when you choose violence, a bad ending is coming for somebody. It might be right, it might be wrong, but we don't get to act shocked or surprised when violence resolves violence. And even if you don't think that this officer acted perfectly, it is impossible to deny, based on the footage, that Lyoya chose violence. That is a consequential choice, no matter the race of the chooser. Any claim otherwise requires evidence of white people commonly stealing tasers off of cops and experiencing good outcomes. Nobody who makes that choice has a good time for long. And if this cop acted with racial prejudice, with eager glee to kill a black guy, why did it take so long to get to that point? Why did he waste his time with lower forms of force for minutes? Why did he waste his time with a wrestling match when he could have just enjoyed his racial execution kicks right away on site? It's because, of course, none of that happened. It was not a police attack. It was not racially motivated. It wasn't even trigger happy. It was trigger hesitant, in fact. And when all of that is clearly evident on unedited video you can watch for yourself, but the headlines summarizing it claim the complete opposite conclusion, you are dealing with propaganda that's interested in programming you, not journalism that's interested in informing you. That's why the same networks chopping up this story into an unrecognizable mess are simultaneously raging at the prospect of losing some control of that information flow to you. When their control and the truth are synonymous, they have a hell of a lot to lose. Thanks as always for listening and for supporting this channel. Always appreciate that thoughtful discussion down below, and especially over on Minds, that is at ML Christiansen. You're always welcome to coming out and chat in my live streams. Those are linked down in the description. Looking forward to it. Goodbye.